There is something sacred about land that has been in your family for generations. Every tree, every fence post, every weathered barn board tells a story of those who came before you. My grandfather purchased these 80 acres in 1937. My father expanded it to 100 acres in the 1970s, and I have been its caretaker for the past 15 years. The rhythms of farm life are predictable: planting in spring, harvesting in fall, maintaining equipment in winter, and watching the miracle of growth repeat itself year after year. The Willow Creek Farm sits 20 miles outside of town, nestled between rolling hills and bordered by a creek that gives the property its name. We are not a massive industrial operation. We grow vegetables on 10 acres, have 30 acres of hay fields, keep a modest herd of cattle, and maintain the rest as natural woodland. The old red barn has been repainted countless times but still stands straight and proud. The farmhouse is simple: white clapboard with green shutters, a wide front porch with 2 rocking chairs, and flower beds that burst with color from April through October. For decades, our nearest neighbors were other farmers who understood the unspoken rules of rural life: respect property lines, help when needed, and mind your own business otherwise. But 5 years ago, developers purchased the Johnson property to the east. Within 18 months, cornfields transformed into street grids, model homes, and signs proclaiming Bayview Estates, luxury country living. The irony was not lost on me that there was no bay to view from these estates, only my farm and the distant hills beyond it. The first strange letter arrived last spring. I almost threw it away thinking it was junk mail. Notice of violation, property maintenance standards, read the heading, followed by complaints about unsightly agricultural equipment visible from community areas and improper fencing not meeting neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. At the bottom was a signature from Karen Williams, president of the Bayview Estates Homeowners Association. I laughed and tossed it in the recycling bin. My farm predated their development by nearly a century. I had never signed any HOA agreement. This had to be a mistake. More letters followed over the next few months, each more demanding than the last. I ignored them all. Then came the phone calls, which I also disregarded. It was during the busy harvest season that I first noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked at the edge of my property: a black SUV and a silver sedan, both with well-dressed occupants taking photographs and making notes on clipboards. I was too busy to confront them, and they left before I finished my field work. The real shock came 3 days later. I was returning from delivering produce to the local market when I spotted the same vehicles parked in my driveway. My stomach tightened as I pulled up behind them. No one had permission to be here, especially not while I was away. As I stepped out of my truck, I could see the barn door was open, a door I distinctly remembered closing and latching that morning. The fury rose in my chest as I strode toward the barn. Inside, I found 3 people: 2 men in pressed khakis and polo shirts, and a woman in a tailored pantsuit, examining my equipment and taking photos with their phones. They did not even have the decency to look embarrassed when I confronted them. "What are you doing on my property?" I demanded, my voice echoing against the barn walls. "You are trespassing." The woman stepped forward, extending a business card I did not take. "Mr. Mitchell, I am Karen Williams, president of the Bayview Estates HOA. We have sent you multiple notices about violations on your property that need immediate attention." I could feel heat rising to my face. "I am not part of your HOA. This is private property. You have no right to be here, especially not inside my buildings." One of the men smirked. "Actually, according to our documentation, this parcel was incorporated into the Bayview Development Zone last year. We have every right to inspect properties within our jurisdiction for compliance." That was the moment something changed inside me. This was not just annoying anymore. It was threatening. These strangers believed they had authority over land my family had worked for generations. As I ordered them off my property, watching them leave with unhurried confidence, I had no idea this was just the beginning of a battle that would test everything I believed about justice, community, and the true meaning of home. The morning after finding those trespassers in my barn, I spread all their notices across my kitchen table. There were 13 letters in total, each more threatening than the last. The most recent one stated I had accumulated $4,750 in fines for violations ranging from improper mailbox design to unauthorized agricultural activity visible from community spaces. It was surreal, like reading fiction about another person's life. I had never agreed to any of this. I spent the entire day researching this, Bayview Estates HOA online and through calls to the county clerk's office. What I discovered was troubling. Bayview Estates had started as a modest development of 30 homes 5 years ago, but had aggressively expanded to 96 homes through 3 development phases. With each expansion, they had attempted to incorporate adjacent properties into their jurisdiction through various legal maneuvers. The county clerk sounded tired when I explained my situation. "You are the 4th property owner to call this month with similar concerns," she said. "Bayview has been particularly aggressive about claiming jurisdiction over neighboring properties. They file amendments to their HOA boundaries with us, but whether those amendments are legally binding on non-consenting properties is another question entirely." That evening, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was an official violation notice, professionally printed on heavy cardstock with the Bayview Estates logo embossed at the top. The document listed 23 separate violations, each with corresponding fines that would accrue daily until remediation. The most alarming items included removal of all agricultural equipment visible from any community vantage point, cessation of livestock operations creating unpleasant odors, and immediate demolition of non-compliant outbuildings constructed prior to current standards. The total fines already exceeded $7,000, and according to their calculation, would increase by $450 every day I failed to comply. At the bottom was a note indicating that after 30 days, they would place a lien on my property and begin legal proceedings. My hands shook with anger as I read through it again. This was nothing short of extortion. 2 days later, I attended my first HOA meeting at the Bayview Estates Community Center. The room was filled with about 40 residents seated in neat rows of folding chairs. At the front, a long table held 5 board members, with Karen Williams centered like a judge presiding over court. She was exactly as I had pictured her, mid-50s, blonde hair styled in an expensive bob, pearls at her neck, and designer clothes that seemed excessive for a community meeting. I sat in the back row, just listening for the first hour as they discussed speed bumps, playground equipment, and the color palette for acceptable exterior paint colors. The level of control was astounding, everything from the height of grass to the number of flowers allowed in front yards was regulated. When they finally opened the floor for community concerns, I raised my hand. "I am Robert Mitchell, owner of Willow Creek Farm," I said, standing as all eyes turned toward me. "I have received numerous violation notices and fines from this HOA, despite never joining your association or signing any agreement. I want to understand by what authority you claim jurisdiction over my property." Karen Williams smiled thinly. "Mr. Mitchell, so good of you to finally join us. Your property falls within the expanded boundaries of our community as filed with the county last year. All properties within those boundaries are subject to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I never agreed to that, I replied. My farm has existed for generations before your development was even conceived. The community standards exist to protect property values for everyone, she said dismissively. Your agricultural activities are incompatible with the premium neighborhood we have established. The board has been more than patient with your situation. Another board member, a man with silver hair and a golf tan, leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, you need to understand that fighting this will be costly and ultimately futile. We have excellent attorneys who have handled similar situations. It would be much easier for everyone if you simply complied with the standards. As I looked around the room, I noticed several homeowners avoiding eye contact. One woman gave me a sympathetic glance before quickly looking away. This was not a unified front. This was a regime of intimidation. After the meeting, as people filed out, an older gentleman approached me in the parking lot. "I am sorry about what is happening to you," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "They did the same thing to the Hendersons last year. Their property had a small workshop where he restored classic cars. Karen called it an industrial operation in a residential zone. They fought for 6 months but eventually had to sell and move. The legal fees were crushing them. By the time I drove home that night, the weight of what I was facing had fully sunk in. This was not just about farm equipment or building codes. This was about whether a powerful group with money and connections could simply take control of private property through intimidation and quasi-legal maneuvering. The pressure was mounting daily with those escalating fines. I needed expert help, and I needed it immediately. The offices of Reynolds Rural Legal Services occupied the second floor of a Victorian building downtown. The waiting room had mismatched furniture, filing cabinets with peeling labels, and farm equipment catalogs for reading material. It was clearly not a slick corporate law firm, which was exactly what I wanted. I needed someone who understood rural property issues at a fundamental level. Margaret Reynolds had been recommended by 3 separate farmers when I asked around. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her handshake was firm, her office cluttered but organized in a system only she could decipher. Diplomas from state agricultural colleges and law schools covered one wall, alongside photos of her standing with farmers outside courthouses. "So you have an HOA problem," she said after I explained my situation. "Those are becoming more common as developments push into agricultural areas. Let me see everything they have sent you." She reviewed the documents silently, occasionally making notes or muttering under her breath. After 20 minutes, she looked up with a gleam in her eye that gave me my first sense of hope. "Mr. Mitchell, when was your farm established?" she asked. "My grandfather bought the original 80 acres in 1937. We have the original deed framed in the hallway at home." "And you have maintained continuous agricultural operations since then?" "Yes, without interruption. We have tax records documenting agricultural income for every year." She nodded, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick legal reference book. "Are you familiar with agricultural designation laws in our state?" I shook my head. "Most people are not, which is exactly what organizations like Bay View Estates count on." She flipped through the book to a marked page. "Our state has some of the strongest right to farm protections in the country. Laws passed in 1982 specifically protect established agricultural operations from nuisance complaints and zoning changes brought about by new, non-agricultural development." She turned her computer monitor so I could see it and pulled up a state government website. "This is the Agricultural Land Preservation Act. Section 12.4 specifically states that no local ordinance, regulation, or private covenant enacted after an agricultural operation has been established can force that operation to change its practices, so long as those practices remain agricultural in nature. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lifting. So they cannot force me to remove farm equipment or stop keeping livestock. Not only that, Margaret said, reaching for another folder, but I strongly suspect they have no legal jurisdiction over your property whatsoever. Did you ever sign anything agreeing to join their HOA? Any easement agreements? Any boundary adjustments? Absolutely not, nothing. Then what we have here is not just overreach. It is likely fraudulent misrepresentation of authority. She leaned back in her chair. I need you to go to the county record's office and request every document related to your property and the Bay View Estates development. Look specifically for any filings where they claim to have incorporated your land into their jurisdiction. 3 days later, I returned to her office with a stack of documents. We spread them across her conference table, creating a timeline of both my property history and the Bay View development. What we discovered was shocking even to Margaret. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a map filed with the county. "They have indeed included your property within their Phase 3 expansion boundaries. But here is the problem for them. They have no signed consent from you, which is legally required under state law. They simply drew new lines on a map and filed it." Margaret pulled another document from the pile. "And this is even better for us. Your property is registered under the State Historical Agricultural Registry because it has maintained continuous farming operations for over 75 years. That designation, which your father applied for in 2012, provides additional protections under the Heritage Farm Preservation Statutes." She flipped through more pages, then stopped suddenly. "Here it is, the legal silver bullet. The original Bay View Estates Development Agreement with the county specifically states that they must respect the boundaries of all Heritage Farm designated properties. This was actually a condition of their original zoning approval." My mind was spinning with these revelations. So not only do they have no authority over my farm, but they are actually violating their own development agreement by claiming they do. Margaret smiled. "Exactly. They are counting on you not knowing your rights or the resources to defend them. They have likely done this to others who simply gave up rather than fight." We spent the next 3 hours organizing the documentation into a comprehensive legal portfolio. Each document represented another layer of protection for my farm: the original deed, tax records showing continuous agricultural use, the Heritage Farm designation, the State Right to Farm Act provisions, and the Bay View Development Agreement acknowledging the limits of their expansion. As I drove home that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across my fields. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something beyond anger and fear. I felt prepared. These people had been operating on intimidation alone, counting on their targets being isolated and uninformed. But now I understood the truth. My farm was legally untouchable, protected by layers of law they had conveniently ignored. The question was no longer whether I could defend my property, but how to hold them accountable for what they had already done. The morning started like any other farm day. I was up before dawn, feeding the animals and checking irrigation systems before heading into town for supplies. I returned around noon, pulling my truck up the long gravel driveway, looking forward to lunch and a few hours of equipment maintenance. What I saw as I approached the house made my blood run cold. A black SUV and a silver sedan, the same vehicles from before, were parked in front of my house. But this time, no one was waiting outside. I slammed my truck into park and ran toward the house, heart pounding. The front door was unlocked. I never left it unlocked. I burst into my own home to find Karen Williams and two men in my living room. They were taking photos of my furniture, my family photos, even the stack of mail on my coffee table. One man was placing orange stickers on various items, including my grandfather's antique clock. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I shouted, rage and disbelief making my voice shake. Karen turned, not even startled. "Mr. Mitchell, we are conducting an interior inspection. You have received multiple notices about this scheduled visit." "I never agreed to any inspection. You are trespassing. This is breaking and entering." The taller man, who I recognized as the HOA vice president from their website, stepped forward. "As outlined in the community guidelines, the HOA has authority to enter properties for inspection with 24-hour notice, which was provided via certified mail." "I am not part of your community or your HOA," I said, struggling to keep my voice under control. "You have no right to be in my home. This is illegal entry. Get out now before I call the police." Karen sighed dramatically. "This hostility is unnecessary. We are simply doing our job. You have numerous violations inside the home as well: non-compliant window treatments, unapproved interior paint colors, and these." She gestured at my farm records filing cabinet. "Commercial activities in a residential space." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I want your full names, all of you, right now." "Really, Mr. Mitchell," Karen said, rolling her eyes. "We are the Bayview Estates HOA board. We have authority over all properties in the community." "This is not part of your community. You broke into my house. Now identify yourselves for the record." The second man, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "We entered through an unlocked back door. No breaking occurred." That was when I noticed it. My mother's silver picture frame moved from its place on the mantel, family photos on the side table rearranged, kitchen drawers slightly open. They had gone through my personal belongings. The violation was visceral, sickening. These strangers had touched the most private aspects of my life, had invaded my sanctuary. "I am calling the police," I said, dialing 911. "You are all going to wait right here." Karen and her companions exchanged looks, gathering their things. "This is unnecessary drama, Mr. Mitchell. We will leave our inspection report. You have 30 days to remedy these violations before additional fines are applied." "You are not leaving until the police arrive," I said, moving to block the doorway. "You broke into my home. That is a crime." 20 minutes later, two county sheriff deputies arrived. To my disbelief, they greeted Karen by name. "Mrs. Williams, what seems to be the problem here?" the older officer asked. Before I could speak, Karen launched into her explanation. "We are conducting a routine HOA inspection that Mr. Mitchell is obstructing. We provided proper notice according to community guidelines." "That is not true," I interjected. "I never received any notice. More importantly, my property is not part of their HOA. They entered my home without permission while I was gone. That is breaking and entering." The younger deputy looked bored. "Do you have documentation proving your authority to enter the property, Mrs. Williams?" Karen produced a folder of papers, pointing to specific paragraphs as she explained. The officers nodded along with her explanation, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like pity. "Mr. Mitchell," the older officer finally said, "this appears to be a civil matter between you and your homeowners association. If they provided proper notice according to your community guidelines." "They are not my homeowners association," I interrupted, my frustration boiling over. "I have never signed any agreement with them. They have fabricated jurisdiction over my farm, which has been in my family for generations before their development existed." The officers exchanged looks that clearly communicated their skepticism. I was being treated like the troublemaker, the unreasonable one, despite strangers having invaded my home. "I have documentation," I said, walking to the filing cabinet they had been examining earlier. I pulled out the folder Margaret had helped me prepare and presented it to the officers. "My attorney has confirmed that my property has specific legal protections as a heritage farm and is exempt from HOA jurisdiction under the State Right to Farm Act. These people forged documents claiming my property was part of their development without my consent." The older officer began looking through the documents with more interest now, particularly the Heritage Farm designation and the Right to Farm Act provisions. His expression changed as he read. "Mrs. Williams," he said slowly, "are you aware of these agricultural designations?" For the first time, Karen looked uncertain. "Our legal team has determined that those designations are superseded by the development agreement with the county." "That is false," I said firmly. "Your own development agreement specifically excludes heritage farm properties from your jurisdiction. It is right there in the documents." The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. The younger officer was now taking notes. The older one handed the documents back to me with newfound respect. "Mrs. Williams, I suggest you and your colleagues leave immediately. Mr. Mitchell is correct that without his consent, you have no legal right to enter his property. If he wants to press charges for illegal entry, that would be a criminal matter, not civil." The color drained from Karen's face. We were merely following procedures established by our legal counsel. If there has been a misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding," I could not contain my indignation. "You broke into my home. You went through my personal belongings. You have been harassing me for months with fraudulent fines and threats. This goes well beyond a misunderstanding." As the officers escorted the HOA representatives from my property, I stood on my porch watching them leave. The violation I felt went bone deep. That night, I could not sleep, imagining strangers moving through my home, touching family heirlooms, judging the life I had built. Every creak of the old farmhouse made me start awake, wondering if they had returned. By morning, something had changed within me. The fear and uncertainty were gone, replaced by cold, clear determination. They had crossed an unforgivable line. This was no longer about defending my property. It was about holding them accountable for what they had done, not just to me but potentially to others who lacked the resources to fight back. I would not rest until justice was served, not just for my farm but for everyone who had been bullied and intimidated by these self-appointed authorities. The next 3 weeks became a methodical mission, unlike anything I had undertaken before. Every moment not devoted to essential farm operations was spent building my case against Bayview Estates HOA. My dining table disappeared under expanding piles of documents, evidence logs, and research materials. Sleep became a luxury I rarely indulged as the stakes became increasingly clear. This was not just about my farm anymore. It was about stopping a pattern of abuse. The morning after the break-in, I installed security cameras covering every approach to my property. The system was expensive but necessary. I needed to document any further intrusions. I also placed "No trespassing" signs at regular intervals along my property line, each one citing specific state statutes regarding criminal trespass. Let them try to claim ignorance again. Margaret Reynolds was invaluable during this process. We documented everything meticulously, each letter received, each interaction with HOA representatives, each piece of evidence from the break-in. I had preserved the muddy footprints with photographs from multiple angles, showing the path they had taken through my home. The orange violation stickers they had placed on my belongings were collected as evidence, each one bagged and labeled. Documentation is everything in cases like this, Margaret explained during one of our meetings. We need to establish a pattern of harassment and unauthorized actions. Each incident builds our case. I filed a formal police report about the break-in, insisting on criminal trespassing charges against all 3 HOA representatives who had entered my home. The sheriff's department was reluctantly cooperative after reviewing my documentation, particularly the Heritage Farm designation that definitively placed my property outside HOA jurisdiction. Margaret helped me draft formal complaints to multiple agencies: the State Attorney General's Office, the County Housing Authority, and the Department of Agricultural Land Preservation. Each complaint detailed the harassment campaign and included supporting documentation showing how Bayview Estates had systematically targeted properties outside their legal jurisdiction. "This is likely not the first time they have done this," Margaret said, reviewing our filings. "Their tactics suggest a practiced approach to intimidation. Let us see if we can find others who have experienced similar treatment." Through local farming networks and community bulletin boards, I began searching for other property owners who had faced HOA harassment. The response was shocking. Within days, I had connected with 7 other landowners who described nearly identical experiences: threatening letters, fabricated fines, claims of jurisdiction without consent, and intimidation tactics designed to force compliance or sale. The Peterson family had sold their 5-acre horse property after 6 months of HOA harassment about their non-compliant agricultural structures, and mounting daily fines they could not afford to fight. The Garcias had given up their small organic vegetable operation after the HOA threatened to place liens on their property over commercial agricultural activities in a residential zone. Each story followed the same pattern. Initial resistance met with escalating pressure until the property owners either complied or sold to developers connected to Bayview Estates. Most disturbing were the accounts of inspections conducted without permission. 4 different property owners described finding strangers on their land, or evidence someone had entered outbuildings during their absence. The Johnsons, an elderly couple who had lived on their small farm for 40 years, described returning home to find HOA violation notices placed inside their home on their kitchen table. They had been too frightened to report it as a break-in, instead paying over $12,000 in questionable fines to resolve the situation. I convinced 5 of these property owners to provide sworn affidavits describing their experiences. Margaret arranged for a court reporter to record their testimonies. One by one, they described the pattern of intimidation, each account adding another brick to the wall of evidence we were building. With Margaret's guidance, I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for all communications between Bayview Estates and county officials regarding boundary extensions and jurisdiction claims. The documents we received revealed troubling connections. The county commissioner overseeing development approvals had a brother-in-law who worked for the primary construction company building Bayview Estates homes. Email exchanges showed the HOA had received informal assurances that their boundary extension claims would not be challenged by county authorities, despite clear legal requirements for property owner consent. While building our case against the HOA, we simultaneously strengthened the legal protection for my farm. Margaret helped me register additional legal notices with the county affirming my property's agricultural status, and explicitly rejecting any HOA jurisdiction claims. We filed updated heritage farm documentation emphasizing the continuous agricultural use for over 80 years. Each filing created another layer of legal protection that would make any future harassment attempts more difficult. After 2 weeks of intensive evidence gathering, Margaret began drafting the most important document in our counteroffensive, a comprehensive cease and desist letter. Unlike the generic templates available online, this was a precision legal instrument crafted specifically for our situation. It detailed every unauthorized action by Bayview Estates, cited all relevant laws they had violated, presented evidence of their pattern of harassment, and outlined the severe legal consequences they now faced. "This is not just a warning shot," Margaret explained as we reviewed the final draft. "This document formally puts them on notice that we have documented multiple potentially criminal actions, from trespassing to harassment to filing fraudulent documents with county authorities. It gives them one opportunity to make this right before we proceed with both criminal charges and civil litigation." The letter demanded: 1. Immediate cessation of all communications regarding my property. 2. Formal retraction of all violation notices and fines. 3. Written acknowledgement that my property was never legally under their jurisdiction. 4. Removal of any liens or claims against my property. 5. A public apology to all affected property owners. 6. Restitution for damages caused by their unlawful actions. The consequences for non-compliance were explicitly stated: criminal charges for breaking and entering, civil litigation for harassment and fraud, formal complaints to all relevant state agencies regarding their development permits, and public disclosure of their tactics to every homeowner in Bayview Estates. "Is this too aggressive?" I asked as we finalized the document, which ran to 15 pages with supporting exhibits. Margaret shook her head. "What they have done is not just unethical, parts of it are potentially criminal. They have been counting on people being too intimidated or under-resourced to fight back. This letter shows them exactly what they are now facing because they picked the wrong farmer to bully." The final step in our preparation was scheduling a delivery method that could not be ignored. We arranged for the cease and desist letter to be hand-delivered by a process server during the next HOA board meeting, ensuring maximum impact. Additionally, copies would be sent by certified mail to each board member's home address, the HOA's attorney of record, and the development company behind Bayview Estates. The night before the scheduled HOA meeting, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset over fields my grandfather had first plowed nearly a century ago. The weight of responsibility felt enormous, not just for my own land, but for all those who had been bullied before me and those who might be targeted after. Tomorrow would determine whether justice was still possible against powerful interests who had operated with impunity for too long. One thing was certain: I was as prepared as I could possibly be for the confrontation to come. The monthly Bayview Estates HOA meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. in the community center, a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a stone facade that attempted to project both luxury and permanence. I arrived at 6:30, accompanied by Margaret Reynolds and 2 of the neighboring property owners who had provided affidavits. We wanted to secure seats near the front where we could not be ignored. People began filing in soon after, nodding to friends and acquaintances. Several residents glanced curiously at our small group, clearly recognizing we were not typical attendees. By 6:55, all 75 seats were filled, with additional residents standing along the back wall. The energy in the room felt different from the previous meeting I had attended. There was a current of tension, whispered conversations, and darting looks at the empty board table at the front. Precisely at 7:00, the side door opened and the HOA board members entered. Karen Williams led the procession, impeccably dressed in a navy blazer with gold buttons, her posture rigid and confident. The 5 board members took their seats behind the long table, arranging papers and water bottles with practiced efficiency. Karen tapped the microphone twice before speaking. "Good evening, residents of Bayview Estates. I call this meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance." The formality of it struck me as absurd, as if we were at a government proceeding rather than a neighborhood meeting. After the pledge, Karen moved efficiently through procedural matters and committee reports. I noticed she avoided looking in our direction completely, though she must have recognized me. "Before we move to new business," Karen continued after 40 minutes of routine matters, "I want to address some concerns that have circulated on the community message board regarding our boundary enforcement activities. The board wants to assure all residents that our actions are fully compliant with all legal requirements and are designed solely to protect your property values and community standards." The timing could not have been more perfect. Just as she finished this statement, the main door opened, and a man in a formal suit entered carrying a leather document case. He approached the board table directly, ignoring Karen's mid-sentence pause. "Karen Williams," he asked loudly. "We are in the middle of a meeting," she replied sternly. "If you have business with the board, please wait until the public comment period." "Karen Williams, I am Robert Johnson, licensed process server for Westfield County. I am here to serve you and the Bayview Estates Homeowners Association with legal documents." He proceeded to place a thick envelope in front of her. "You have been officially served." The room fell completely silent. Karen's face flushed crimson as the process server continued, placing identical envelopes in front of each board member. "Bradford Collins served. Jennifer Harding served. Michael Desmond served. Gregory Phillips served." Karen attempted to regain control. "Please continue with your business elsewhere. We are conducting an official meeting." The process server nodded politely. "My business is concluded. Have a good evening." He walked out as professionally as he had entered, leaving behind 5 stunned board members staring at their envelopes. Karen cleared her throat. "We will take a 5-minute recess while the board reviews these documents." "Point of order," I called out, standing from my seat. All eyes in the room turned toward me. "According to your own bylaws, Article 7, Section 3, any documents presented during an official meeting must be acknowledged in the minutes and may be discussed as part of the current session if relevant to agenda items. As these documents directly relate to your statement about boundary enforcement activities, they should be addressed now." Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mr. Mitchell, you are not a resident of Bayview Estates and have no standing to cite our bylaws." "That is precisely the point of those documents you have just received," I replied calmly. "Your claim that I am subject to your jurisdiction is not just incorrect, it is potentially fraudulent." Murmurs spread through the audience. I could see curiosity and confusion on many faces. One brave resident raised his hand. "Madam President, I think we should hear what this is about. Several of us have questions about the recent expansion of HOA boundaries." Karen glanced at the HOA attorney, who had begun skimming through the document with increasing alarm. He whispered something to her, and her expression tightened further. "Very well," she conceded. "Mr. Mitchell, you have 3 minutes for public comment." I moved to the center of the room where everyone could see me. "My name is Robert Mitchell. I own Willow Creek Farm, which has been in my family for 3 generations. For the past 6 months, your HOA has claimed jurisdiction over my property without my consent, sent me fraudulent violation notices with fabricated fines, trespassed repeatedly on my land, and most seriously, broke into my home during my absence. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. I continued. The documents you have just received include evidence that my property is legally protected under the State Heritage Farm designation and the Right to Farm Act. They also include proof that your own development agreement with the county explicitly excludes heritage farm properties from your jurisdiction. I pointed directly at Karen. What your board has been doing is not just unethical. Breaking into homes and threatening property owners is potentially criminal. You have engaged in a pattern of intimidation against multiple property owners in this area. I gestured to my companions in the front row. These are your neighbors who have similar stories of harassment and fraudulent claims of authority by this HOA board. Some have already lost their properties due to your tactics. I removed a USB drive from my pocket. I would like to present evidence that may be relevant to every homeowner in this room. Before Karen could object, a younger board member, Jennifer Harding, spoke up. I think we should see this evidence. Her voice shook slightly, but her gaze was steady. If there have been actions taken that board members were not fully informed about, we need to know. Karen started to object, but the room had already turned against her. Several residents called out in support of viewing the evidence. The HOA attorney was now frantically flipping through the cease and desist documents, his expression growing more concerned with each page. With the board's reluctant permission, I connected my drive to their presentation system. The first slide showed a map of the original Bay View Estate's boundaries from 5 years ago, then overlaid the 3 expansion phases, clearly showing how my farm and other properties had been unilaterally incorporated without consent. This is the legal reality, I explained, advancing to documentation showing my farm's protected status. My property is legally untouchable by HOA regulations due to multiple state and county protections. Yet your board filed these documents. I displayed the fraudulent boundary amendments, claiming jurisdiction you knew you did not legally have. The most damning evidence came next, photographs of the break-in, including muddy footprints through my home, moved personal items, and the violation notices left inside. These were taken after Mrs. Williams and 2 board members entered my locked home without permission during my absence. The sheriff's department is currently investigating this as a criminal trespassing case. Karen finally found her voice. These allegations are absurd. We conducted a properly noticed inspection according to our guidelines. Guidelines that do not apply to my property, I countered immediately. Your own development agreement with the county, Section 12, Paragraph 4, explicitly states that Bay View Estates shall respect and exclude all properties designated under the Heritage Farm Preservation Act. This was a condition of your original zoning approval. The HOA attorney leaned over and whispered urgently to Karen. Her face paled visibly as she listened. When she straightened, her demeanor had changed completely. In light of these concerns, the board will need to consult with our legal counsel before commenting further on this matter, she said stiffly. An older resident in the 3rd row stood up. I have a question. If this farm was wrongfully included in our jurisdiction, what about the Anderson property that was assessed special fines last year? They had a similar situation. Another resident joined in. And what about the 3 properties on the north boundary that were forced to remove outbuildings? Were they actually under HOA authority? The questions kept coming, resident after resident raising concerns about boundaries, authority, and actions taken by the board. What had begun as my individual fight was transforming before my eyes into a community awakening. People who had accepted the board's authority without question were suddenly examining the legitimacy of its actions, not just toward me but toward each other. Through it all, Karen sat rigidly, her practiced composure crumbling as the meeting spiraled beyond her control. The other board members looked increasingly uncomfortable, especially as residents began demanding to see the legal documentation for all boundary expansions and enforcement actions of the past 3 years. Margaret Reynolds chose this moment to address the room. As Mr. Mitchell's attorney, I want to make clear that our cease and desist letter offers one opportunity for the board to correct these legal violations before we proceed with both criminal complaints and civil litigation. The residents of Bayview Estates should understand that if the HOA faces significant legal judgments, those costs will ultimately be passed to homeowners through increased dues or special assessments. That statement sent another wave of concerned murmurs through the crowd. A financial threat to their own wallets was something every homeowner understood immediately. Karen abruptly stood up. "This meeting is adjourned. The board needs to consult with legal counsel." She gathered her papers, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. "Point of order," called out the same resident who had spoken earlier. "According to the bylaws, a meeting can only be adjourned by majority vote unless there is an emergency." "This is an emergency," Karen snapped, her composure finally breaking. But it was too late. The room had turned against her completely. As the board attempted to leave, residents blocked the aisles with questions. The community that had been ruled through intimidation was finding its voice, demanding answers about the legitimate extent of HOA authority and the legality of past enforcement actions. I stood to the side, watching as the power structure visibly shifted. This was more than I had hoped for, not just addressing my own situation, but potentially helping an entire community recognize and reject the abuse of authority they had endured. The battle was not yet won, but in this moment of public revelation, something fundamental had changed. The emperor's clothes had been seen as non-existent, and no amount of procedural maneuvering could undo that revelation. The certified letter arrived exactly 3 weeks after the HOA meeting showdown. The envelope bore the letterhead not of Bayview Estates, but of Preston, Hamilton, and West, the prestigious law firm now representing them. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it at my kitchen table, bracing for another round of legal threats. What I found instead was something I had scarcely dared to hope for. "Dear Mr. Mitchell," the letter began formally. "On behalf of our client, Bayview Estates Homeowners Association, we are writing to formally retract all violation notices, fines, and claims of jurisdiction previously asserted regarding your property at 1478 Willow Creek Road." The letter continued for 3 pages, acknowledging that my property had been erroneously included in their jurisdiction due to administrative oversight, and confirming that all records had been corrected to reflect the proper boundaries. All fines were canceled, all liens withdrawn, and most significantly, a formal apology was extended for the misunderstanding regarding property access. Though carefully worded to avoid explicit admission of wrongdoing, the message was clear. Bayview Estates was retreating completely. The final paragraph indicated that Karen Williams was no longer serving as board president, and that the HOA had implemented new procedures to ensure proper verification of jurisdictional boundaries in all future matters. I immediately called Margaret to share the news. "They caved entirely," I told her. "Every demand in our cease and desist letter has been met." "I am not surprised," Margaret replied. "After reviewing the evidence we presented, their attorneys would have advised immediate damage control. The potential liability from the break-in alone would have been substantial, not to mention the pattern of fraudulent jurisdiction claims." The ripple effects spread quickly through the community. 2 days later, I received a call from Thomas Jenkins, a resident I had met at the HOA meeting who had raised questions about the Anderson property. "You might want to know what has happened since the meeting," he said. "The entire board except for Jennifer Harding has resigned. Karen apparently left town altogether. Someone said she moved to her sister's place in Colorado. The HOA management company has been fired, and an outside auditor has been brought in to review all enforcement actions from the past 3 years." Thomas paused before adding, "A group of us residents have formed a committee to rewrite the bylaws completely. Several people mentioned wanting to talk with you about the legal protections you found. There is a lot of interest in making sure this kind of overreach cannot happen again." Over the following weeks, news continued to arrive. The county commissioner, whose family connections to the development had been exposed in our documentation, announced he would not seek re-election. The county opened a formal investigation into the approval process for Bayview Estates boundary amendments. Most satisfying was learning that the sheriff's department had forwarded the breaking and entering case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges against Karen and the 2 board members who had entered my home. As spring arrived, bringing fresh growth to my fields, I received visits from neighboring property owners seeking advice about their own legal protections. Word had spread about the Heritage Farm designation and the Right to Farm Act. I connected them with Margaret, who began holding monthly information sessions for rural property owners facing development pressure. One unexpected outcome was the formation of the County Agricultural Heritage Alliance, a group dedicated to identifying and registering eligible farms for legal protection. What had begun as my solitary fight had catalyzed a movement to preserve rural properties throughout the region. By summer, 27 additional farms had filed for Heritage Farm designation. Even more surprising was my evolving relationship with the reformed Bayview Estates community. Jennifer Harding, now the interim HOA president, reached out to discuss creating buffer zones and mutual agreements between the development and surrounding rural properties. "We want to be good neighbors," she explained during our first meeting. "Most residents move here because they appreciate the rural character. The last thing they want is to destroy it." This led to the development of the first rural-suburban cooperative agreement in the county, a formal document establishing respectful boundaries, shared maintenance of common areas, and even joint community events. The first such event was held on my property in late summer, a farm-to-table dinner that brought together HOA residents and local farmers for an evening of connection rather than conflict. As I stood watching suburban families introducing their children to farm animals, sharing meals with farming neighbors they would have previously complained about, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond mere legal victory. This was transformation, from conflict to cooperation, from boundaries to bridges. That evening, as the sun set over my fields, I walked to the weathered oak tree where my grandfather had often rested after long days of work. The farm would remain in our family, protected now by layers of legal designation that would prevent future encroachment. But more importantly, it had become a symbol of something vital: the importance of knowing your rights, standing firm against intimidation, and creating community based on mutual respect rather than power and control. The HOA inspectors who broke into my home had unwittingly sparked a reckoning that transformed not just my situation, but an entire community's understanding of rights, boundaries, and neighborly relations. By trying to force my farm into their narrowly defined vision of community, they had instead catalyzed something far more authentic and enduring. As darkness fell and the last guests departed, I looked up at stars my ancestors had farmed under for generations. The land remained, as it always had, legally untouchable, protected by knowledge, defended with determination, and now surrounded by a community that valued its presence rather than seeking to control it. Some battles are worth fighting not just for personal victory, but for the principles and precedents they establish for all who follow. This had been one such battle, and standing under the vast night sky, I was grateful to have had the strength to fight it.